The Big H Podcast, tune in now. Conversations that'll wow. Laugh and learn, stay a while. Let's explore that Hilton style. From the highs to the lows, every story just explodes. Mike's got questions on the go, diving deep from head to toe. Every week the guests align, sharing moments so divine. Stay with us, the pace is fine. Every episode you'll find. The Big H Podcast, tune in now. Conversations that'll wow. Laugh and learn, stay a while. Let's explore that Hilton style.
Hello and welcome to the Big H Podcast and for another episode of Conversations with Crumb. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to our Town of Parma and Village of Hilton historian, Mr. Dave Crumb, who will introduce our guest. Take it from there. Dave?
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. It's a pleasure today to have a former Hilton resident with us, Anne Pfarrer Hall. Anne is from Palm Springs, California. I think her heart's still in Hilton, though. She comes as often as she can. And she's got some wonderful stories to share with us, lots of interesting things, and we'll both have questions for her. And so here we go. Anne, you're on. And what was it like growing up on Hazen Street back in the 50s?
Oh, we're talking 40s.
40s. Wow.
40s on Hazen Street. And it was not much of a street in those days. A lot of ruts. And I remember, believe it or not, the Iceman. Now, of course, the younger people don't understand the Iceman.
Not the rock star.
That's right. Back in those days, we didn't have refrigerators. We had ice boxes. And in order to cool the food, they had to put ice in them. And, of course, some times of the year, the ice melted a lot faster than others. But we would always chase the Iceman down the street. He'd chip off the amount of ice a person wanted. And while he took off with the ice to put it in their ice box, we were allowed to pick up the chips of ice. And in the summer, we got a lot of ice. We loved that, yeah.
I remember those ice men were, the ice boxes were often on the porch. And the porch kind of sloped. And that was because there was a drainer underneath, right. And if the water got beyond that, it would just drain off the porch.
That's right, right.
You remember the name of the Iceman?
I do not.
Was it George Wright by any chance? Does that ring a bell?
Could be.
He lived over on Hubbub Street and right next to the Arlington, and he was the last Iceman that I can remember.
Okay.
That would be Glenn Wright's father.
Okay. Yep. And then, of course, there was the milkman.
Oh, yeah. Lots of them.
Our milk box was on the side of the house. You just open the little door. He'd put the milk in, close the door. We were on the inside. We take the milk out and go up the steps with it. Of course, they also left eggs and whatever. A lot of people had milk boxes on their porch, but ours happened to be built in to the house on the side.
That was Hilton's version of Amazon.
You got it. Then down at the end of Hazen Street, we had the mill, Hilton Lumber and Mill. And our Aunt Marguerite worked there for many years. And they had a pop machine, 5 cents for a bottle of pop. And I'd go down there and she'd give me a grape pop. But we also, I don't know if people knew this, but a bunch of our kids, including your mother, Mike, Kathy Welch, we would go down to the mill, and when it wasn't open, there was a small door on the side of the large building where the wood was, and we could sneak in that little door and go in and play in the lumber, and we would make forts and whatever. So, we had a good time on Hazen Street.
Well, that confirms Morrow Gable's version too, because he said that was his playground.
That's right. That's what it was. And
they were tolerant. The people they kept you away from dangerous things.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. But we did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dee Gable was there. Virginia Cornish lived right around the corner. Debbie Dykeman, Sally Michael, Kathy Welch, all lived in that. Butch Blair. Mm-hmm. Some people know him as Bob, but he was Butch to us. We all lived in that neighborhood.
He was Gary Blair's
younger brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was another sister, Nancy.
There were 3 sisters. On East Avenue, on the corner of Smith and East Avenue, there's a double.
Yep.
And Nancy and Pat
okay.
Blair both lived there, and they married Hilton boys, Ralph Ingraham and Kirch Gessner. I think they called him Kirch or Stretch. Maybe they called him Stretch. And Shirley lived in the big house with Gary and Butch. She was the older sister who brought them up when their parents were gone. So
the parents had died early?
The parents had died. I can almost remember the father. Mm-hmm. I never knew the mother. So
I can remember Butch and Gary real well, but I don't. And Nancy maybe.
Because she was married to Ralph, and you knew Ralph.
Of course. Right? Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Back to the Dykmans. Do you remember May Howard? Who lived
sure.
Them? Can you tell us? Because May was a Titanic survivor, and around Hilton, nobody talked about that. It was kind of
her feet must have been. I'm going to guess her feet were frozen in the water. She must have been in the water,
mm-hmm.
and she walked with a limp. You could tell her feet hurt her. But yeah, she lived in the Dykeman house, took care of the Dykmans. There was a 3rd floor in the house. Mm-hmm. Our grandfather had built the house, W.I. Smith.
Really?
And there's a big barn in the back. It's still there. I went by it the other day. There's
5 cars or 5 buggies.
There's now that many, but at the time there weren't. I believe our grandfather, Lloyd Burritt, built the barn, as he did our house on Hazen. And in the upstairs, there was a full upstairs. They had a basketball hoop. And in the winter, when the weather wasn't too good, we went upstairs in the Dykman's barn and played basketball.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, did you ever have a conversation with May?
We spoke, but not a conversation. No.
The impression I got, I never did see her, but I talked to Ed or Morrow, and he sort of talks the same way you do. She was in the background, kind of making sandwiches and helping out.
Quite tiny. She was very small.
Yeah.
But she was awfully nice to the kids. I know that.
Yeah. Well, I think she made that her home. Yeah. And that became her family.
Oh, that was her home. Yes.
Yeah. It's a very interesting story as time goes on. While it was going on, it was just going on. But now we look back, and everybody's interested in the Titanic now. Back when we were growing up, it was, we knew a ship had sunk, but there was not much conversation about it. Anyway.
That also, just beyond the mill, was the apple processing.
Oh, yeah,
of
the
some
candy
sort.
Factory.
And we were allowed to play on the apples.
Wow.
I think they were going to make applesauce out of them anyhow, but we did. We climbed right up on top of the hills of apples.
And that hill of apples is where Hilton East is today.
Right.
And it was about as big as Hilton East. I mean, it was huge.
Yes, it was.
I mean, there's a picture of a young girl up on top of those apples, and you can see the house on East Avenue. But it's just an amazing picture.
That's right.
And you try to tell people today, and they can't envision it. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Well, so that was our industrial section in Hilton.
It was at
down
that
by
time.
The railroad.
Mm-hmm.
What are your memories of the Hojack?
I remember, and I'm going to say this is more stories that I heard than actual. But our mother on Hazen Street, the hobos would come to the house, which was right up the street from the railroad, and Mom would feed them. They also, of course, went to the hotel.
yeah.
And my grandmother would feed them. And that's what they did in those days.
Sure.
And
did they do a little work for you?
I don't
rake
recall.
the lawn
I
or
just
something?
remember the stories that they came here to eat.
I've heard the same thing
Yeah.
from different areas. But I also heard sometimes they'd say, can we rake your lawn or
Sure.
weed the garden?
Probably
or something.
did. Probably did.
And people would give them a sandwich.
Mhm.
I think that was the custom in the area to,
In those days, that was bad times.
Kind of a religious tone to it that you wouldn't deny anybody a meal.
That's right.
If you had your own. You remember Jimmy Smith?
I know the
He
name.
lived with Frank and Cora Cox.
Okay, I was going to mention Corey Cox.
Yeah.
Corey, she was to us.
Okay.
Corey Cox. And if the whistle blew, we went out the side door and yelled, "Corey, where is it?" Because Corey Cox was the one who rang the whistle at the fire
And
department.
she did that up until she was 80, I
That's
guess, or
right.
maybe beyond.
Yeah.
She had the button in her bedroom, I
Right.
guess. And I know my mother, when she'd hear the fire whistle, would call her and say, "Mrs. Cox, where's the fire?"
That's right.
One time they were at a bridge party. My mother called her and she said, "What's up on South Avenue? I'm looking out the window right now and they're throwing pillows out the window." She gave her a full blown, and of course she told everybody at this bridge party.
Yeah.
That was a small town grapevine out.
That's true. That's true.
Somebody told me a story once, and maybe this shouldn't go on the podcast, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. That you and Betty Lou had a tiff and a frying pan one.
Oh, Betty Lou threw a dustpan.
Okay.
A dustpan at me, and it kind of took off like a first. What do they call those?
A kite or something?
No,
a boomerang.
Well,
Frisbee.
Frisbee.
Okay.
Like it kind of took off like a frisbee and went through Corey's window. Yeah.
Oh, my.
She also, I'm going to tell on Betty Lou now. She also kicked a kickball through the Gables front window with Mr. Gables sitting right there.
Oh my God!
And we were all afraid of him before that. We were really afraid of him after that.
How those things end up?
Yeah, that Betty. Well, we never got in trouble.
Forgave you.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Kids doing that kind of thing. Interesting.
We didn't do horrible things. We did a few dandies, but.
Who are some of the other people around Hilton that you remember that were kind of significant in your life, through the church, through the school, through Main Street?
Nancy Buell
would
be one, and she lived 2 miles out of town, but after school, she'd walk home with me and then join us in everything we did, and then her father would pick her up on his way home from work.
Oh,
and her
nice.
family, I think you knew, some of them lived up above, Stoddard's?
Let's see.
Or the next building.
Mary Turgan lived above Stoddard's. And then her mother, I believe, lived up over the stores on Main Street.
Okay.
And that's the one we talked about the other day when George Edelman saved her.
Yeah.
Maybe your grandmother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nancy and Sandy Smith, who lived out on Lake Avenue, near the Dr. Nundy, the veterinarian, and
Jeannie Colomer.
Jeannie Colomer would come into town occasionally. Lived on Colomer Road, of course. Bob Tabor.
Yep.
And we just lost Bob this past week.
Did not know that.
We lost Bob this past week. His memorial will be next weekend. Yes.
Sorry to hear that. So up on Main Street, did you ever go to the Candy Kitchen?
Oh, we lived in the Candy Kitchen.
We're getting away from Hazen Street now.
We lived at the Candy Kitchen. They had three booths on one wall, two on the other, and two in the middle. But they had one booth that was only big enough for two people over in the corner. And of course, that was the chosen one when you were with your boyfriend.
Yeah.
But other than that, we lived there.
And
Just
who
about.
Who were some of the people you remember there?
All the ones we've just been mentioning.
Well, I mean, Nick.
Oh, you mean the proprietors?
The proprietors.
Nick and Ethel and Pula, mainly.
Yeah. Remember Louie?
Louis was still alive.
I
Louis
remember
was still,
Louis.
and Mrs.
Mary.
Paneritis was there occasionally.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And we call it Louis
Yeah,
in
I
those
did
days.
too.
That
Or
was
the
Louis.
Or the Greeks.
We called it Louis, and then they started calling it the
Next.
Greek or Nix
Yeah.
after Louis was gone. But
I think they came in 1915, and they come from Massachusetts. And Louis' brother or uncle had owned it first, but he moved on, and Louis got it.
okay,
And they really ingratiated themselves in Hilton. They came without a lot, and they left, very solid citizens and highly regarded. And remember any of those funny signs they used to put in the window about they didn't like having the teenagers come down from school right after school let out because the kids would eat up all the French fries, and he wanted them for his regular customers. And then they get too many in there. And there was something like Ixnay Bixnay, no CD, no Edie, little signs that, you had to buy something. If
you're a little younger than me, aren't you?
Not too far. Not too far.
Yeah, because they didn't have French fries when we were there.
Okay.
The restaurant that went in next door that I never knew the name of, but they had French fries, and everybody was excited about the French fries.
So that was a new
so then Nick had them. But when Louis was alive, there were no French fries.
Well, I heard this from John Foster, who's much younger. So that probably ties in. I remember the Mexicans over there, and also at the Pleasure Shop. That a scoop of vanilla ice cream, chocolate sauce, and peanuts.
Mexican restaurant.
It was
Mexican,
so good.
Yeah,
those ice cream
that
sundaes.
That and Johnny Mall that were the two big hits. But when Nancy Buell, her name's Stewart now, but when Nancy Buell would stay after school and we'd go to my house, we quite often would stop at Nick's or Louis, it was at the time. And the Hilton record came out on Thursdays. My dad was postmaster.
Yep.
And the Hilton record was 10 cents. And I would go to the post office and say, Dad, do you want me to get the record? And he'd say, oh, yeah. And he'd give me a quarter and told me to keep the change. So now I had 15 cents. Nancy had 15 cents. And we bought a milkshake with 2 scoops of ice cream.
Wow.
For 30 cents.
No inflation back then.
That was...
Of course, it was relative. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, what about Grace Wilkins over at the Pleasure Shop?
I went there occasionally.
Yeah.
Different groups went to each of the different places. I'd go there for magazines and once in a while an ice cream or something. But we knew Grace the Wilkins because their daughter was in our class. Judy Wilkins was in our class.
Yeah. Mr. Barilli.
The jeweler.
No, that's Mr. Robillard. Mr. Barilli was the cobbler.
Oh, the shoe place.
The shoe place. Yeah. Jimmy Albano.
I forgot
his grandfather.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking about Jimmy Albano the other day. I can't remember why, but
yeah. His father was Ross Albano, and I think Ross married Mr. Barilli's daughter.
Okay.
Mr. Barilli, Vincent Barilli, had come from Italy. And so we had the Greeks on one side and the Italians on the other side. And he'd been a POW, prisoner of war.
I didn't know that.
And I don't know all the details, but then he came to Hilton and settled in, and he had learned the shoe business over in Italy, I guess. And in the museum, you'll see a shoe shine chair that's raised up, and he would have that out in front of the store where he would sign everybody's shoes, the businessmen in town. And the businessmen in those days all wore 3-piece suits, even in Hilton. And of course, they wanted their shoes shine so that they looked, polished.
Yeah. Yeah, the Albanos lived on Gorton Avenue. Jimmy once in a while was down our way.
Yeah. Speaking of your dad being the postmaster, I can remember when Blanche Randall was the postmistress.
Right.
And Armand Downs was the mail carrier.
Right.
And that was interesting because as kids, I grew up on Main Street. You were the Hazen Street crowd. I was part of the Main Street gang, which is kind of like, remember that comic strip, Little Rascals?
Right.
That's what it reminds me of. Larry Way, Jim Hawkins, Dave Grutman, Bob Grutman, myself, Karen Blandick, maybe a few others. And we'd go around the block. Well, one of the things we would do was help Armin sort the mail.
Oh.
Yeah, don't ask me how we got into that, but he would drive in behind the
They
stores.
wouldn't allow that these days.
No, and somebody would say, let's help Armin sort the mail. So we get in, we toss the mail around, and pretty soon he'd give everybody a nickel and say, well, why don't you boys go and girls, go get yourself an ice cream cone over at the Pleasure Shop. That's how he got rid of us nicely. What a nice way to do that, though. And another time we would go over to Bill Newcomb's.
And that was what it cost for an ice cream cone.
That's right, yeah,
With a nickel.
But, I think that's why we helped him sort the mail, because he would always do that. And maybe we did it 4 or 5 times, but it's a memory that's stuck in my head.
Sure.
I've confirmed it with Dave Grutman, so I'm not dreaming this stuff up.
No, I know Dave and Eileen. Yeah.
So, let's go a little further down Main Street. What about Mr. Michael?
Mr. Michael, I still talk with his daughter regularly.
Okay.
She's in Detroit. She has the same problem with her legs that her father had, and Bev did too. Bev is gone though. But Sally is still in Detroit, and we talk regularly. We Zoom.
Oh.
A lot of us from the Hilton
still
Zoom in the afternoon on Wednesday.
Technology is a great thing for people that are far-flung today, because
That's right.
you can keep up and do those kind of things. Are you the ones that call yourselves the ladies from Hilton?
Women of Hilton.
Women of Hilton.
Women of Hilton. And Sandy Smith came up with a logo of the Women of Hilton. We haven't met since last Tuesday.
Well, that's pretty good.
But there used to be quite a bunch of us, and now there's only 6 or 7 left. It's just been bad.
Time marches on.
Yeah.
I know down at Hilton Beach, we spent our summers down there back in the day, and some of the parents, the mothers, in later years called themselves the ladies of the lake.
I have heard of them, but I didn't know which ladies they were.
Be Dorothy Crumb, Kate Smith, Dorothy Burrett.
Dorothy Burrett, of course, was one of the relatives.
Yeah, and I remember she would always come over to my mother's and say, now, I just met another Burrett. And she says, can you explain how I'm related to them? Because she was from a city, and she didn't know Hilton. She was totally, even when she was in her 70s, she still didn't have it all figured out. There's so many. Interesting. But anyway, there were about a dozen of them, and they, I don't know, go to dinner together, or they were close like you guys are, friends. Let's see, moving down, what about the drugstore? Can you remember Orange Green?
Barely.
Yeah.
I remember her, Violet.
Violet, his daughter.
More.
And his wife, of course, was a Burrett.
Right.
So they're kind of shirt-tail relatives. Orange was quite a industrialist in the community. He came about 1895 as a graduate of the Buffalo Pharmacy School. Dr. Williams needed a druggist, and Orange took the job, and he dug right in, and before you know it, he bought the corner drugstore, which had been a general store, and about 3 years later, it burned. Then he built another drugstore out of wood, much more elegant than that original one. 10 years later, that burned. And forever after, Orange Green built out of bricks. And those are the buildings that we still have.
That's still,
Right. Those buildings on South Avenue in Maine were built in 1916 by him. And then, of course, the yellow brick building that's still the drugstore, and some of those other stores. He got into real estate and very successful. And Violet, I think, became the first woman pharmacist out of Buffalo University back in probably 1920, something like that. She ran the store with him until she was 50. And then she sold it to Bill Brinkle. And he's the guy we remember.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was with Erica Brinkle yesterday.
Now, who's that? His daughter?
Erica would be his daughter-in-law.
Oh, Dave's wife.
Yeah, David's wife.
Right. Dave just donated a lot of the medicines that came out of the basement of the drugstore. A lot of them are sitting right over there in boxes.
Oh, I see the little boxes over there.
It's a wonderful collection, and we haven't quite gone through it all yet, but Amanda, who's our assistant village historian, did a window display a couple of months ago showing all these old medicines and things that, just brought a lot of memories back to people that aren't on the, things like Milltown, which was for anybody suffering from anxiety and, just different things.
Well, you mentioned those buildings that he built.
Mm-hmm.
I remember after the fire, those few buildings were still there, and the bank was gone, but the bank vault was still there.
Yes.
And they built a wooden walkway from the sidewalk into the vault so people could get to their safety deposit boxes. Yeah.
And most people were thrilled when they found everything still intact in their safety deposit box, like stock certificates, jewelry, maybe even cash. Mm-hmm. Nothing, was frozen up or couldn't be used. There's a picture around here somewhere of Bernie Cadian counting all the money on the floor with a couple other people that had gotten wet during the fire that was still legal tender. And Doris Cadian had saved those pictures, and she brought them up here. Wonderful stuff comes into this office over the years. Just people drop by and drop it off, and some of it not terribly valuable, but it's connected to the history.
That's right.
Like what you brought in, and it's up there. Can you tell us about that, Mary? Could you bring that down and we'll put that in front of Anne, because that's a good story.
Well, this came from the Arlington Hotel, of course, before the Arlington Restaurant on Main Street. This, which most people think goes like this, is actually like this, and it's a heater.
Yeah.
And in the Arlington Hotel, way back when, they had gas lamps in the rooms.
Let's see, we had a picture of one right here.
Yeah, and this would sit on top of the gas lamp, and there's holes all the way around, and the heat would come out through those holes and help heat the people sitting there in a chair trying to read and so on.
And that's kind of like some of these, when you're sitting outdoors today, they have these fire things that keep you warm in inclement weather. Yeah. That's a.
Well, I had 5 of them left from the Arlington. I have quite a few things in my house in California left from the fire, or from the Arlington. Mary also has a number of things from the Arlington. All of us girls had Barber bottles. There were 4 Barber bottles. There were 4 of us girls.
Okay.
We each got one of those. I have mine and Donna's. That we each had chairs.
Mm-hmm.
What didn't go to Wadsworth's over on Hill Road, they put in their barn. I think we each got a chair. I do put mine away when I'm having a party because I don't want anybody to sit on it because it's that flimsy. Yeah. But they're out of the dining room at the Arlington.
The pictures of the dining room we have here that probably show those chairs.
And they do, and they show Uncle Charlie Skinner in the corner at the little bar where he would serve the dining room, whereas the big bar was in the other room.
Explain to us your connection to the Skinner family.
Our grandmother, Alice Pfarrer, was Alice Skinner.
Okay.
Her brother was Charlie Skinner.
Okay.
Charlie, that's an interesting story. Charlie and Aunt Vine lived on Underwood Avenue, number 20, I believe.
Okay.
And that's where the road ended, on that side. Mm-hmm. And they played baseball in the field just beyond 20 Underwood. And in those days, way back when, women were not allowed to go to baseball games. My grandmother would go up the third floor in the Arlington and watch the games from the window with binoculars. And I have those binoculars of hers.
That's a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they weren't allowed to play on Sundays either.
No. But eventually, when the Hilton Peaches were playing back in the 20s and 30s, they did play on Sundays at Fireman's Field down here in Hilton. Yeah. And there was a regular ball diamond there, and the fencing and the bleachers, the whole works. When I was growing up, we went down there to watch the games. Also
down at Hilton Beach, they set up a diamond because Nicholas Schultz was also the manager, that'd be Artie Schultz's father. And they didn't like this no playing on Sunday business. Well, they're too close to the Baptist church, and people, so they went down to the lake and they played down there. Charlie Skinner Jr. told me about that. You remember that?
Oh my goodness!
And he also told me that his father, Charles Sr., went to Rochester Business Institute, I believe, and he played serious baseball for the Indians. I've never heard of this tribe or this team before, but that's who he played for, and he was very good, and they wanted him. But his father, George Skinner, said, "Get back here, son. You've got to run this place." And he came back and gave up his baseball career. Did you ever hear that story?
No, but not totally, because my dad also gave up baseball.
Okay.
And became a Monroe County Sheriff under Albert Skinner.
So Al Skinner is a relative too. How would you?
Al and Anna Skinner were cousins of our grandmother and Charlie Skinner.
Okay.
And Charlie Skinner, not Charlie. Albert Skinner was Monroe County Sheriff for 32 years. 32 or 34, years. Something like that.
He was a real Monroe County icon.
He was.
He's almost falling out of memory today, so it's good to talk about him, to remind people that he was a very popular person in this community, especially in Parma and Greece. He lived over the line in Greece.
In Greece, yeah.
But his heart was in Parma.
Right.
His grandparents came from Parma, and he knew everybody here. He attended every funeral in town, and if anybody was in trouble over here, he would help bail them out.
And his sister Anna ran the jail.
Yeah, she was Rochester. The matron.
Yeah.
Yeah, and neither of them married.
It was not a pretty place either.
I was never there.
I wasn't either. I heard that.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you got a private tour.
No.
Okay. Well, let's see. So we talked about the Skinners, and Mary, you gave us a great collection of Skinner memorabilia. Maybe after the interview, I'll pull that album out. Anne would like to see it.
I've seen them all. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. One thing I want to get, if you'll excuse me just a second, is a Skinner relic.
While Dave's away, talk a little bit about your mother and father and your siblings and your family.
Okay. Dad, like I said, was a Monroe County Sheriff until I think it was 1951, 52. So I was 12, or almost 12. And then he became postmaster here in Hilton. And then, of course, he had mom. Mom was a Burritt. She was the oldest of the Lloyd and Edna Burritt's kids. And we lived on Hazen Street until 1959, when they built over here on Brook Street, where my mother lived until her death, and Mary lives there now. Completely rebuilt the home, and she and Tom Tillabine live there now.
And an interesting sideline to that story is that all the lots on West Avenue used to go from West Avenue to the creek.
That's right.
And when Alice Skinner Tarr bought that property, or she and her husband, that lot was still all the way to the creek.
Right.
And while Mary, you lived there, it also went to the creek. So that's one of the last lots.
It was.
Went from West
It
End.
was. Before that was Charlie Nichols.
Yeah.
To the east of it, and that one that didn't go all the way through.
And the other thing too is that Brook Street wasn't there until what, about 1950?
And that wasn't even the whole street.
No,
The street ended there at Charlie Nichols' house when I was growing up.
I think that the Brook Street was once like a back alley that people would take their horse and buggies to get them in the horse barn, or they might have a cow. A lot of people had cows in Hilton back in the day, and that's where they got their milk. I know my mother said her father had a cow out in a barn behind the house. They had the horses. This is before the automobile. Hard to envision that, but
we didn't. When I was very young, we didn't have a car.
Yeah. No, it's there were still people using horse and buggies a little bit out in the country here and there.
But when Dad was a Monroe County Sheriff deputy, he worked a lot at the License Bureau. It was next door or something, and people would come to our house and get their paperwork, fill it out. Dad would take it in, get their plates, bring the plates out, and give them their plates. The people didn't have to go to the city to get their license plates.
Again, Amazon.
Yeah. Back in those days, anybody trusted anybody.
And another thing, I was told that people used to ride to work together in the city. There was a lot of carpooling going on back in the day. This is what I wanted to show you. This is something you've probably seen, but it's the open house of the old Arlington Hotel,
right?
In 1897, and all the stores are listed there that supported that grand opening.
And we've talked about a bunch of them today.
Yeah. And up in the third floor, I think they had a big dance. It was St. Patrick's Day. Probably had corned beef and cabbage. And
at the Arlington, I remember my grandmother cooking on one of those huge wood-burning stoves, where you had the thing to lift up the pad or whatever it was called and put the wood in and so on and so forth. And she would cook during bullhead season. I keep forgetting the word bullhead, but during bullhead season, she would cook fry thousands of bullheads, and people came from all over on the train to get a bullhead dinner at the Arlington Hotel.
They probably all came out of Braddock's Bay.
Probably.
The locals, they'd bring them up, and it was all things were done.
Yeah.
And down at Braddock's Bay Hotel, not recently, but maybe 20 years ago, they still had bullhead night down there. So
I would love a bullhead dinner, but I'm not here. It's not the right time of year.
It's got to be in the spring.
Right.
Yeah. Let's talk about something else. What do you remember about the carnival?
We would go to, what was his name? Eli. He had a cherry orchard on where the hotel, where the high school is now.
Are you thinking of Ira Clapper?
Ira Clapper had a cherry orchard, and we all went there as kids. Your mother included, Mike. We all went there as kids and picked cherries because it was the week before the carnival.
That was motivation.
Steve Burrett. Oh, I can remember Steve up at the top of the trees throwing cherries at everyone. He didn't put as many in the bucket as he threw.
Probably ate a few on the way, too.
Yeah, probably did. Did. But that's where we got our money to. I mean, none of us were rich in those days. None of us had any extra money for kids to go to the carnival. But we would earn money at Ira Clapper's to go to the carnival and have a good time.
Yeah. And the carnival, is it's been around a long time.
Well, that's when we used kernels of corn for numbers to mark the numbers on the bingo cards.
Bingo, yeah, I can remember that.
We put kernels of corn on the numbers when they called the numbers.
Do you remember the dunk the fireman?
Dunk the fireman.
Were you ever in on that?
Oh yeah.
Did you get dunked?
No, I Dunked.
Oh, you don't? Okay. We were talking.
I had an arm.
Yeah. We were talking to Glona Kleinbeck, Chatterson.
Oh, my goodness, there's a
couple of-
name from the past.
Yeah.
She lived on Hazen Street.
Yes, and she was in the family restaurant about 2 weeks ago, and she and John Foster and she stopped by our table, and she said when she was about 13 or 14, Eddie, her father, put her up there to get dunked, and she said the first ball that went through dunked her, and she said I was too young to tell him no. She just she never did it again, though, but that was quite a story. Yeah. Well, the carnivals, I don't know the exact date. I think it's before 1900 that they had a strawberry festival on the corner of Main Street in what was a village green. This is before the new stores went up to raise money for the firemen. And that's probably the seed where this carnival got started. I'd have to check the record a little bit, but I think thereafter they did something every year to raise money. And of course, by the time we came along, it was in full swing with a Ferris wheel, a merry-go-round, chair swings. I got really sick on those ones. And
my shoe came off on the chair swings once. Brand new shoes. I finally got my mother to where she would let me have loafers instead of black and white sandals, or you know what I mean, black and white shoes.
Sensible shoes.
Yeah, but first time I ever had them, and the shoe came off on the chair swings and hit Mr. Misma in the head.
Oh my gosh, Eddie Misma,
his father.
Yeah,
his father.
Well, that's a story. No, nobody would remember that until we got it on the.
Well, I hadn't remembered it in years.
It's amazing what kind of comes out.
And of course, I did lose. These days, you'd lose the shoe. Somebody would have the shoe and it would be gone. No, in those days, they all waited for me to get down off the chair swing and give it back to me. Yeah.
So you leave a shiner on his.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But he wasn't angry.
No, they took it in stride. Yeah. It's just something that happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a question that you'd like to?
I had a couple things. When we do these podcasts and Dave has guests on, names come up, you have a relationship with the Burretts. That's your...
My mother was a Burrett.
Okay.
She would be High Burrett's sister, older sister.
And High Burrett, I think they used to name a basketball tournament after him.
Probably.
High Burrett basketball tournament.
I came here to play in the cancer tournament, which is run by Edelman's, who, bought the Arlington. Mm-hmm. I came here this summer to play in that specifically with Mary. We always had a family team, our mother, our sisters. But anyhow, I digress. I brought with me my bag of teas and things. Mm-hmm. High Burrett. Do you remember? High Burrett. Something about the zoo.
About the what?
The zoo. The beer tent.
Yeah, the beer tent.
The beer tent at the carnival.
Nichols or...
It's something. Yeah. But it's High Burrett something, and I brought it with me. Yeah.
There were 4 siblings, right, in your family?
And us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's you, Mary, is it Betty Lou?
Betty Lou and Donna.
And Donna. Okay. Did you do any sports or hobbies in high school?
I played them all.
You played them all. I want to hear a little bit about it because you just said you had a good arm, right?
I did. But in fact, I pitched on the softball team.
Okay.
Basketball was a good one. Hockey, I played. Field hockey, they called it. I hated it. I didn't like the sticks because you were always getting hit in the ankles. Mm-hmm. Soccer and volleyball. Those were the ones I played.
So back in that time period, you could play all of those sports seasons. It's a little bit different now.
And I ended up playing, running the playground in the 60s up here in Hilton. And, of course, you and your brothers and your sister, Jill.
Great times.
You all came every day to the playground.
How many years did you run that? Do you remember?
Just a few.
Just a few?
I ended up quitting that eventually.
And what were some of the early jobs that you had, like maybe in high school or high school?
When I was 15, my husband and who turned out to be my husband, Al Hall, and I both worked at the IGA run by Al Worden.
Okay.
And on the corner, of course, that burnt during the fire in '65. But we worked our way through high school, and I went to RBI, and I worked my way through there with the high school job. I will say in the summer, a lot of people, Al Worden scared a lot of people. With Al and I, on a hot summer day, he would fire us and tell us to be back by 4. In other words, go to the lake, get cooled off, come back, work the next shift or whatever. We adored him, Al Worden. And Tilly. Yeah.
Fired you for a day? Tilly fired you for a day?
He fired us for a day.
So you went to RBI for college? Is that Rochester Business Institute?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And excuse my ignorance, what type of things did you study in that business?
Accounting and administration. I also took business law, which I didn't like. We sat in the back of the room and played cards most of the time. But no, accounting and administration, which came in handy when I became a realtor here in Hilton. And I worked that job here about 15 years. I sold most of the houses in Hilton at one time or another.
What type of, you obviously like real estate, right? What did you like about it?
Helping people. Yeah, mostly that was it. But then I went to California as a tour guide, which I loved.
Dave, I'll throw it back to you for a little bit.
What does Hilton seem like when you come back? Is it still home, or has it changed so much?
This will always be home.
Yeah. Okay.
This will always be home. I still meet with the girls from here. On Friday mornings they have coffee at the Rexall drugstore, and I went in this week and had coffee. Of course, I don't drink coffee, but I was with them.
Well, it's nice to be able to come back to where you grew up and still have friends and family there to welcome you.
Well, there were 9 of us that had lunch at Dakota recently from here.
That's great. That's great. Well, we hope you'll come back many times and bring new stories with you that you recollect, because it's good. Of
course, I usually drive when I come here.
Did you this year?
Oh yeah.
Okay. It's a long drive. It's cross country.
I've done it 56 times.
Really?
And I don't need a map.
You have your favorite places to stop?
I do, but when I have somebody with me, and quite often I have somebody from here with me, they'll fly out and drive back, or drive from here to California and fly back. Betty Lou, when she got sick, she had taught school for 38 years, I think it was. And she said to her family, I've never seen this country, and I taught school for 38 years at Hilton. She said, I want to see it all before I pass away. She had cancer, among other things. And so she went with me, and I can do the drive in 3.5 days. With her, it was almost 3 weeks. And I felt bad that my sisters didn't get to spend that time with her. But Betty Lou did an album, a huge album of that trip. So they got to see what she had seen. But
so you've seen pretty much the whole country.
I go all different ways.
Yes. That's a great accomplishment.
Whatever anybody wants to see.
Yeah.
Except for Tina Murray. Faustina Ratliff was her name.
Yes.
And she grew up too on Kalmar Road. And she's been with me several times, but one time she wanted to go to Yellowstone. I had been there with my sister Donna a couple of years before that, and we never made it. The car conked out on the way up the mountain, and she doesn't let me forget. Yeah.
Wow. Now, you've also traveled to Europe, too, haven't you? To Italy?
To Italy, with Donna, yeah.
And did your mom go?
There, Mom went with Mary.
Okay.
Mom went with Mary. Go ahead.
Mary, you travel a lot, too. You New Orleans and many different places. So you're kind of a traveling family. You like to...
We do.
Yeah.
We do. She's been to a lot more countries than I have. I've only been to Italy.
What did you do in Italy when you were there? Where did you go? To Rome? And
Pescara.
Okay.
Which is on the Adriatic Sea. Yeah. And I really liked that area myself. That was my favorite. As for the Coliseum, I never saw it because we had waited till the last day to go and do that, and it poured.
Oh my
So,
gosh! Yeah.
but I did everything else. I loved Venice.
Venice is very.
Yeah, I went to the Gold Bridge, and yeah, I had a good time.
Well, you know, it's important to travel as much as you can because there's so many things to see, and we're in an era where you still can do that.
That's
It's harder today, I think, than it was back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You know, the airlines are
right
difficult at times, and prices are high. But there are a lot of tours.
And that's why
I
drive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, I think it's great that you make that long trip, but you know it well. So it's just like getting in the car and you know where you're going to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And probably, do you have a favorite restaurant along the way?
Not really. Branson, Missouri is a favorite stop. I haven't been there in several years, but a lot of the people have been with me when we stopped there.
You take Route 66?
It's in a lot of areas. You'll hit it here and there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Route 66 quite often.
How long does it take you from Palm Springs to here if you don't spend a lot of time stopping? Is it about 3 days?
3.5.
3.5 days, yeah. Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about your daughter, Susan, and some of her accomplishments.
Susan is, right now, she just got a $10,000 grant from the state, and she's to produce some kind of art project for the people in her area, which is the Southern Tier.
Okay.
And she lives in Angelica. And she does hair weaving, which most people don't even understand it. She didn't either until a number of years ago when she got into it. I drove her to Missouri. That doesn't sound right, but
didn't that start with Idaho or Iowa?
No.
I think you said Missouri. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a woman there who was, we believe, the only woman left who knew how to make Victorian pieces with people's hair, which is what they did in the Victorian days before there were pictures.
Yeah.
They took, if somebody passed away, they take some of their hair, make a flower out of it, and eventually make a frame full of a wreath, what they called a wreath, Victorian wreath. And so Susan learned to do this from this woman. And so now Susan might be the only one who does these flowers. There are other people who do lockets and things like that. And she's got a few pieces from all these different things.
Well, that's a very esoteric craft that it's almost been lost.
It is, yeah.
And it all started out with what they called Victorian mourning.
Right, exactly.
After Queen Victoria lost her husband, she set the tone for mourning back in the 19th century, where everybody, women would wear black for a year, and they make these hair wreaths, make jewelry out of hair.
That's right.
And people that don't understand that think it's like kind of weird, but it's really quite a talent. And the items are fascinating to look at. It seemed to me that you told me that, and I think Mary told me that Susan made a hair wreath out of all the Burritt family. Is that correct?
Our family.
Yeah,
your
our family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And wasn't that on display at Memorial Art Gallery at one time?
No.
Chautauqua.
Chautauqua.
Yeah.
Got it. Oh,
Chautauqua.
Yeah. You got to talk about Chautauqua here. Have you given programs down there?
No, Susan does.
Susan does.
Susan has 2 weeks there.
Wow.
Most people have one, and she's got 2. Mary has been a number of times. I have not because I can't walk that much.
I've never been. I've been to Chautauqua, but I've never attended that. And Chautauqua was one of the last interesting places.
Exactly. What you're talking about.
Where people come in and talk about whatever it is they want to, and people come and attend. And I don't know how to describe it any other way, but I've got to get that done one of these days because it's. Now, does she talk about her talent of hair wreaths and making hair wreaths?
At Chautauqua?
Yeah.
No, at Chautauqua so far, I believe it's bookbinding and paper making, bookbinding, showing people how to make their own journals and things like that. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. Well,
she does beekeeping too.
Beekeeping?
Yeah. A lot of these things started when she was teaching at Pittsburgh at the elementary schools. Yeah. But now she doesn't work anymore.
But she's keeping all these old crafts alive.
Well,
that's a great thing.
This hair wreath is people are donating. They're coming to. She set up shows, shall we call them, like twice a week all over the southern tier through this grant, and people are coming and donating their hair, and wow. There's quite an article written about her in the Olean newspaper last week.
I think, Mary, you gave us a copy of that article. I think somewhere along the line of that walking tour that we took.
No. This is recent.
Is it?
Yeah,
okay.
This is last week. They did this article about her.
Well, we're hoping to have her come to Hilton sometime and do a program for the Historical Society.
Oh, she would love it.
We're talking about it. It's just a matter of making a schedule.
You asked me for business cards of hers, and yes. I did bring you a couple.
Good. That's great. Yeah. That's great. Back to Mike. You probably thought of a couple more questions.
I did, just a couple. That's your daughter. You have a couple more kids, too, a couple boys?
Michael and David. David is passed.
Okay.
But Michael lives in Greece.
Okay. And you said your daughter Susan was a teacher?
She taught
at one point.
She didn't have teaching credentials, but she taught at Pittsburgh Elementary School different things than book learning.
Okay. Yeah. Do you have any grandchildren?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about them.
Michael, well, let's start with the oldest. Candace now also lives in the southern tier and has a couple of my great-grandchildren. And she has like 60 acres down there. And she has all kinds of animals. And she is a manager at Walmart in Victor. Her husband works for Dower General. And they love it down there in the southern tier also.
Is this Susan's daughter?
This would be Michael's daughter.
Okay.
And Michael has a son, Michael, who lives in Brockport, and he's a physical therapist. Doing quite well. Susan has two boys, Danny and Ben. They both are buying houses as we speak. Danny is going to buy just outside of New York City, in Woodstock, and he lives he's been living in New York City for several years. He started out both of them started out filming, and I can't remember the name of the man in Rochester who had did the talked about the movies. I can't remember. We all knew him at one time. Anyhow,
I'm sorry, I can't pull it up either.
They both won lots.
Garth.
It started with G.
Yeah. I do know him. He's a friend of friends of ours. He passed.
Right.
Right. Jack Garner.
Jack Garner. Oh. He liked the work that these boys did. But Danny now has gotten into. He started his own company, and he does. Oh, I know you want me to talk about Furby. Danny, remember the old Furby doll?
I do.
It's coming out again. Coming back, and Danny is producing the commercials for it. So that's what Danny does. He produces, and he's an editor. He loves editing. So
now, are they both down in New York area?
No. Ben just bought a house at Seabreeze.
Oh, I was just at Seabreeze this morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with my grandchildren, and I cut it short because I knew we had the podcast. I didn't want to be totally frazzled after writing on the Jackrabbit. That's what I first wrote on back in the 40s, I think. And it's still there today, 2024. And I wrote it with my 10-year-old grandson. He wrote it about 6 times.
Oh, once was good.
Then I went on the Junior Jackrabbit with my younger grandson, and That was more doable.
Well, there, you know the old putt-putt golf course down there.
Yeah.
He bought on the other side of that.
Oh, okay.
There's a little community back in there.
That's a great little spot back there. It's hidden.
Yes,
yeah,
it is.
And you can go to the park anytime you want to. And let me tell you, Seabreeze is a historic spot. They used to have parks like this all over, everywhere. And Seabreeze is about the last one around here.
Yeah.
And that family has kept that up so well. It was full today. Today was Grandparents' Day. Got in free. And we packed our lunches and had a great time.
Well, when Danny and Ben were young and they all lived in the city, I would pick them up and take them there on Mondays.
Yeah.
Because it was I think it was Grandparents' Day then. So
it's amazing how they've kept that going though so well. And I think people really appreciate it and try to support it, which they should.
But both boys are all my grandchildren are very successful.
No, as they would be. And you've been successful. Well, I think this probably concludes, but do we have any parting questions?
Just a couple. I'd talk a little bit about your travel guides that you did, your tours in Palm Springs.
Well, it was called Celebrity Tours. And growing up, I mentioned the magazines that I would buy at the pleasure shop were usually celebrity magazines. And so I had stories. And I took this tour. In fact, I think Tom and Mary and Betty and Luther all went on it too. And I talked to the owners of the business, and they kept asking me to come and work for them. Well, I put them off for about 3 years. And then I worked for Hilton Schools at the time, and they came up with a buyout, and I said, well, I guess it's time.
Yeah.
And so I had already bought a home in Palm Springs in 94. In 96, I took the buyout from Hilton Schools and went out there and walked in the door and said, still want me? And the rest was history. I had stories about celebrities, and I would drive for 3 hours and not miss a beat. I talked the whole time while I was driving because it's the easy way to do it. I could have a driver, but then I'd have to tell them in the middle of my conversation about Frank Sinatra or something, I'd have to say, well, stop here or turn there or whatever. So it was easier to drive and talk. But my back was to the people, and I had no trouble doing it that way. But at the beginning of the tour, I'd say, is there anything in particular somebody wants to see? And they'd yell out things, and I would design the tour around what they wanted to see. I do about 60 to 70 celebrities on each tour.
Wow.
Did you have a favorite celebrity that you personally enjoyed the most? Or maybe you even had contact with personally?
Lily Tomlin. She rode the bus a number of times, brought her mother. We always knew whether to introduce her to the people or not. She had a big hat and sunglasses on. She didn't want to be recognized. Other than that, she was fine. Her mother, she had bought her mother a home there. And so we got to see her quite often. Who else Tony Curtis couldn't have been nicer to people. Just Suzanne Summers. Of course, I loved Rock Hudson, not Rock Hudson. I'm sorry. What was his name?
Movie star?
Seven Brides for Seven. Howard Keel. Keel, and his wife adored her. Dean Martin's family. Never met Dean. He was gone by then. But Jeannie, his wife, first wife, the mother of his children, lived there. He did live there until he passed away. And one of their children, Ricky, I believe it was, married a girl from Utah named Anne, and they had 3 daughters. And they lived in Utah most of the time, but they'd come to visit in the winter during school break. And they'd call me and say, come on by tomorrow. Kids will be out front. They sold lemonade. And we would pull up the bus and everybody get off and buy lemonade from the kids. And the kids were learning things, it was a good thing for them to be doing. Jeannie would come out and visit with people, pose for pictures. And the Dean Martin family was probably the nicest family you'd ever want to meet. Yeah.
Now, didn't you have an aunt lived in Palm Springs?
My mother's sister, another Burritt, lived in Palm Springs. She had lived in Whittier, and we all went to Whittier to visit her. And she always said, I want to live in Palm Springs. I want to live in the desert, she'd say. Well, she wanted to live in Palm Springs because Frank Sinatra lived in Palm Springs. And she was what did they call the girls back then? Bobby Soxers.
Okay.
Or something. So one day I said to her, you want to go to the desert? I'll take you. And I brought her over to Palm Springs, and we came between Palm Springs is surrounded by 4 mountain ranges. And that's what makes Palm Springs what it is. It's protected from wildfires and floods and everything else. And we came through that pass, and I took one look and said, oh my God, this is wonderful. And she bought there, and so did I.
You got the best of both worlds.
I did.
Hilton and Palm Springs.
Wasn't Sonny Bono the mayor of Palm Springs?
Sonny Bono was the mayor, and there's quite an article just this week in the newspaper or online. I'm not sure where. It might have been online about when the bus went took Girl Scouts up to the tram, which is up about 11,500 feet. And on the way down, it was a young kid that was driving this bus, 22, 24 years old. And he lost control and crashed. And I believe 7 Girl Scouts were killed. But Sonny Bono was the mayor at the time, and he was the only one small enough to get through the windows of the bus and rescue kids. And he was much loved in Palm Springs. He went on there to Congress.
When I was managing the Marriott Hotel in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Sonny and Cher, when they were still an item, came to town to do a program. I have a picture somewhere of myself with them, welcome them to the hotel. And I'm a head taller than both of them. They're both small. I thought Cher was going to be taller. No, she's very small. And their daughter, Chastity, was with them. She was just a baby. It was around Easter time. We had an Easter egg roll in the courtyard, and Chastity went out and rolled eggs with everybody. So
I did get to go to his funeral, and share. Well, of course, they'd been split up for years, but she was there and talked, and Tip O'Neill also. It was huge. It was huge.
One time I was in Palm Springs, we took a tour. It was for a Marriott meeting, and I remember going by Bob Hope's house, which was up in the hill, and they talked about it was like 20,000 square feet or something, but only had 1 bedroom.
I've been there.
Have you?
Yeah.
Is that true? Only 1 bedroom?
Yeah,
he didn't want a lot of visitors.
That is true. But he had 2 other houses before that.
Okay.
One that was bought in 1936, I believe, but it didn't have a pool. He wanted to put a pool in, and the city said, if you put a pool in there, we've got to put up a 6-foot wall. And he says, I'm not going to put a wall that big around the pool. What will we be able to see over that wall? And they said, well, if you don't put a wall around it, you can't have the pool. And he said, well, okay, and bought the house a block away around the corner that had a pool. And that's the one we showed. We showed both of them.
Okay.
But the one that they lived in for 40-some years, she would come out the gate and pretend to take pictures of the people taking pictures of her. Dolores was always a lot of fun.
They were quite a couple.
Yeah.
Very genial.
And then they built that house up there to be a party house, and that's why it only had 1 bedroom.
Yeah, that was it.
And the ceiling opened. They could roll the ceiling over on good days and
have the stars up over
there.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Anne, thank you very much for this time. This has been great, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure Mike has too, and this has been a very nice podcast.
What may I say one more thing to Mike? I'm not going to say who did it, but his mother, they lived above the Hart grocery store on Main Street. And his mother's room overlooked the street, the main street. And the doorway to Hearts was right down there. And I'm not going to say who, but I heard that there were some water balloons thrown out her bedroom window on top of people coming out of Hearts grocery store. Yeah.
I don't know who would have done that.
Maybe in a future podcast we'll find out who those people were.
Can I ask you one last piece?
Sure.
What's some advice you'd give to the younger generation of America, like things to appreciate or maybe
please and thank you. They need to learn to say please and thank you. They need to, if somebody stops their car to let them walk in front of it, give a little wave or mouth thank you. Be more polite. The whole generation needs to be more polite than they are.
Manners.
Well, I've had great memories of you when you used to be our leader at the rec department and everything. And I want to say thank you for being on our podcast with Dave Crumb. And when she's back in town, we'll get you back on. How's that?
Okay, fine.
All right, this has been Mike Heiss with Dave Crumb and Anne Hall on the Big H Podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and join us real soon.
The Big H Podcast, tune in now. Conversations that'll wow. Laugh and learn, stay a while. Let's explore that Hilton style. From the highs to the lows, every story just explodes. Mike's got questions on the go, diving deep from head to toe. Every week the guests align, sharing moments so divine. Stay with us, the pace is fine. Every episode you'll find. The Big H Podcast, tune in now.